whether it's rewarding financially, which I actually think is the least meaningful thing when it comes to risk taking. It has more to do, am I doing something that's meaningful? Am I contributing? Am I part of a team that brings me energy and brings me joy? Those things are usually worth the risk to take.
Welcome to Warrior Money, the show devoted to supporting our brother and sister veterans. I'm Patrick Murphy.
And I'm Dan Kunze.
Today, we are honored to have down with us here on Warrior Money, Laurent LT Therivel, a Marine Corps veteran and now the former president and CEO of US Cellular, the fourth largest wireless provider in our country. LT's journey from serving as a telecommunications officer in the Marine Corps to leading thousands of employees in the private sector is a masterclass in leadership, adaptability, and transition. We're going to talk about how he made the leap, the lessons he carried from service to the boardroom, and the advice he has to our fellow veterans facing their own next chapter. Let's get after it. LT, thanks so much for joining us on Warrior Money. We appreciate you.
It's an honor to be here with the two of you and all of your listeners, and look forward to our conversation.
Awesome.
All right, we're going to go do a deep dive, but right from the jump, bluff, bottom line up front, how did you find your purpose after the Marine Corps into the private sector?
Yeah, it's a tremendous question. One of the things that you find when you transition from the military into the private sector is that you kind of took mission and purpose for granted. It's drilled into us every day. What we do matters when we're in the military, right? Defend our nation, protect from enemies, foreign or domestic. And you never really sit and wonder, does what I do matter? And then you get into the private sector, and depending on where you work, you question that. And so you do have to find ways, either as an individual working inside of a business, to make sure you define your purpose or you define your mission, or as a leader, if you rise to leadership in the private sector, you have to realize how important it is to define that mission and to create that purpose and to get people motivated about what it is that they do. I work in telecom. I've worked in telecom nearly my entire career. I think what we do is incredibly important. And we connect people. We connect people to what matters most, to their friends, to their family, to people, to friends that are deployed. It's meaningful. It's important. And one of the things I try to always drill into my team or the companies that I've worked for is just the nobility and the importance of that mission. Reminding your team of that, but also sometimes reminding yourself of it can be pretty important.
Yeah, we talk a lot about purpose and mission, but one of the other things that we have a struggle with is how do we find the camaraderie that we experienced when we were in service, right? We trust the people we work with. We understand the network. We were able to establish that. So your path wasn't immediately to the president and CEO of US Cellular. You had a few other jumps in the way. Can you talk a little bit about your most immediate transition from the Marine Corps into, I guess it was your MBA program, or what that immediate first step looked like, how you started to find your community of people, and then how that journey worked out?
Yeah, so coming out of the Marines, I went to Harvard Business School. Actually went through, did book rehab to help actually pay for a portion of that. And interestingly enough, when you first show up at grad school, you find other veterans, and you're kind of naturally drawn a little bit together. Shared experiences, shared camaraderie, but also, as you move forward, I think what you find is some of those lessons that you learn. For me, it was in the Marines: trust, mutual respect, shoot each other straight. The nice part is, as much as we're proud of that in the military, it's not exclusive to the military. Now, there are fantastic people in the private sector that you can learn to trust, that you can learn to shoot you straight. And that shoot you straight piece, I think, is really, really important. One of the things I realized as I moved up in corporate America, people more and more tell you what you want to hear. And I think we all wish that wasn't the case also in the military, but sometimes we tell the superior officers what they want to hear, and you also have to kind of balance that. If you're an officer or if you're a leader of people. And so one of the things you find that's really, really important is to establish feedback loops. As you move up in the corporation, how do you make sure that you're getting the straight scoop from people, that you really are understanding what's going on the ground? How your front line, right? I mean, I call them my front line. For me, my front line at US Cellular was the folks in our stores and the folks in our care centers. What's the experience like for them? Because they don't have that direct line to the CEO, right? I mean, yes, in theory, you try to create email boxes and you can call me, but really what you have to do is you have to build relationships. And so, finding that camaraderie, building that trust, it's important both for you personally, but it also helps you do your job better.
Well, tactically, how did you do that? I mean, I joke with Dan because, when I was helping lead the Army, I wrote an email every week, every 10 days to the, really 1.3 million folks in the military. And I got all the emails back, right? So I would have, and sometimes people were like, are you really reading that? And I would write back, yep, really getting that, right? But how did you get that candor, whether it was from the frontline folks at US Cellular or whether it was customers, they're saying, I like this or I don't like that?
Well, the beautiful thing about our industry is our customers have strong opinions and they don't hesitate to share them. And so I never really worried too much about if I was getting straight scoop from our customers. They were more than happy to tell me when we were meeting the mark and when we weren't. Associates, it's a bit of a different story. And so, I think you hit on one, which is regular communication. The first time you say, hey, look, I'm here for you. If you've got an issue, I want to tackle it. I want to hear from it. People will say, you know what, like, nah, it's just talk. Repetition, right? You continue to do it. And by the way, when you receive feedback, you celebrate it and you act on it. And so one of the things that I found was the minute somebody raises their hand, even the first time, if it's incredible trivial, they could be completely wrong. I mean, their feedback could completely off base. It doesn't matter. You have to act on it anyway so people can see you doing that. But the second piece, I think, is being in person. I would go and I would visit our stores. I would visit our care centers. And as long as you're genuine, and I do believe that in the military, you learn how to connect with people on a relatively genuine level. As long as you're genuine and you listen and you're present and you're there, people will generally share things. And then the easiest thing I've found is you get their contact information and you shoot them a text or shoot them an email and just say, hey man, it was great to meet you. And if you ever need anything, just give me a shout. A couple people will take you up on that. And as soon as you do that, then you have to foster and nurture that relationship. And then they will tell you what's really happening, right? And they will tell you when, the initiatives that you've put in place, what's working, what's not working, where the emperor has no clothes. But you have to be really deliberate about establishing those feedback loops. And ideally, for those of our listeners that are kind of early on in their career, try to be part of that feedback loop. Be courageous. Go to your leader. And if you see something that doesn't smell quite right, respectfully, but say, hey, I'm seeing this opportunity and I'd love to talk to you about it. A good leader will always take you up on it.
Yeah, so I'm always I'm kind of in my mid-career journey right now. I'm kind of going between phases, right? You've got a very successful individual contributor kind of moving up into executive leadership for my own self, right? And I look at your journey and I see Bain and Company, I see the military, I see Bain and Company, I see tech startups, I see senior level roles at AT&T, and then I see you being the president and CEO of another company. That's a whole lot of different echelons on the civilian side. What are the like when you go from an individual contributor to a frontline leader to a secondary leader to a CEO of a massive organization? What are the new lessons you have to learn along the way? The reason I'm asking that is recently I've started seeing the value of writing down long-term plans just so that everybody in an organization can be aligned to those things. And I think that's one of the lessons that I'm starting to learn is like, it's great if I say it, it's great if I email it, but it's even better if I'm not there for it and they can see what the plan is. So I'd love your perspective on how you scaled your leadership.
So Dan, I mean, I think you hit on, first of all, I think you were really astute in the way you identified the different layers of leadership. You start with going from an individual contributor to a leader of people. And, being successful in that, it's quite simple. It's just care about your folks, invest in them, make them successful, and they will make you successful. I think the next step is then when you become a leader of leaders. But in an environment or in an organization where you can still know everyone that's in your organization on a personal level, that becomes then a bit more of a balancing act in the sense that on one hand, you have to be clear about the mission. You have to be clear about, what makes an organization successful. But you also have to do your best to not lose that personal touch, and take advantage of the fact that you can still know everyone in your organization. Just because you're a leader of leaders doesn't mean you need to isolate yourself. It doesn't need to be you're on some mountaintop. You still need to be present. You need to be there. You need to be modeling the behaviors that you want your leaders to emulate.
How
Then
about
comes
that?
the real tough.
Yeah, I was going to say, LT. I mean, I think that's great because when you look at like the leaders of leaders, sometimes when you're a leader, it's lonely. Sometimes it's hard to, develop those relationships, especially if there's a geographic distance. How were you able to manage that, whether it was the Marine Corps or US Cellular?
Well, I mean, the first is, I think, accept the fact that if you're going to do your job properly, at times, if you're doing it right, it will be lonely. You may be making unpopular decisions. Before you're a CEO, we're talking leader of leaders. We're not talking, top of the organization. A lot of times you have to represent a corporate position, a policy, a direction, a strategy. It may be unpopular. And when you do that, the easy thing to do, the convenient thing to do is to go, hey, guys, I don't know about this, but we got to do it. Or, there's morons at corporate, with their, they don't understand. And that's not effective leadership.
It reminds me because soldiers and Marines, they like to complain up the chain. Like, there's never going to be. It's like your customers, right? They're gonna tell you how you feel.
Right? Those guys have no idea what they're talking about, right?
Yeah.
And it's leadership, but it's not effective leadership because you're not being an enterprise leader when you do that.
Yeah.
You're leading your team, but you're not being an enterprise leader.
Yeah. Well, listen, hey, LT, we're going to be right back. We're going to take a quick break, and we're going to be right back about advice that you can give to veterans out there who are making that transition and who want to live that purpose-driven life. More in a second on Warrior Money. All right, welcome back to Warrior Money. As we mentioned earlier, LT is a former president and CEO of US Cellular. He's also, though, a former Marine Corps captain, a Harvard MBA, and has led at every level from startups to a global telecom. Today, he's here to share what veterans need to know about turning your service into a long-term career and financial success. LT, welcome back to Warrior Money. So again, you were just mentioning about those different echelons of leadership. As Marines, soldiers, sailors, airmen, guardians, coasties, as they make that transition, about 200,000 a year, transition out of active service, and become veterans. Those transitions are hard, and you've done it several times. You did it when you left Texas A&M, when you left the Marine Corps, when you left academia after leaving Harvard, and then different corporate jobs. What are some of the skill sets that you used or some of those fundamental values, principles that you could share with our brother and sister veterans?
So I'd really point at two things that I think can make your transition smoother. The first thing I'd point at is your personal support structure. Anything you can do to not be on the journey alone is time well spent. And for some of us, that's our family, right? So if we're going for a new job, if we're going for a new position, don't spring that on your loved ones. Because if you spring that on your loved ones and all of a sudden it's, hey, I've got this great opportunity, but it means we got to move to Topeka. And, your spouse goes, the hell I'm moving to Topeka. Well, now you got a problem, right? And now it creates resentment. And so how at the beginning, right, before you're even starting your search, how can you get aligned with your loved ones, your husband, your wife, your boyfriend, girlfriend, your family, your kids? Hey, here is what I want to go do. Here is the path that I want to go on. How does that line up with our plan? Are we aligned? What's in bounds? What's out of bounds? And so you're aligned and you can make decisions as you go with confidence. Because what you want to avoid is that an opportunity comes your way, a job offer, a promotion, a relocation, and you don't know if you've got the freedom, the personal freedom to pursue it. And so having that communication, having that support structure established. And for those of us that don't have families or loved ones, on one hand, fantastic, right? You got more flexibility. On the flip side, it can be lonely. And so how do you seek out forums? How do you seek out groups of people who are in similar situations that can support you and that can help you? So I think that's, path one, don't do this alone. Yeah. And then path two, understand and put yourself in the shoes of the employer. And this is a little bit of tough love for our listeners, but um, the skills that we learned in the military will serve you unbelievably well over the long term of your career. But in the near term, unless you've developed a very specific skill or a very specific knowledge, you're going to be learning and you're going to be growing and they're going to be taking a little bit of a risk on. And so the concepts of leadership and service and being purpose driven and being mission oriented and being able to deliver, those are all things that will help you rapidly ascend. It'll help make you fantastic at your job. But you have to understand that that first role, that first job that you take, you may have to swallow a little bit of pride because you may be doing something that's a little bit under your pay grade or a little bit under the scope of control or responsibility that you're used to. Trust me that those skills that you learn will help you ascend quickly.
One of the things that we talk about oftentimes, and the way you outlined your career and the way I already kind of talked about that. So yeah, get your four walls right. Make sure you're communicating with your loved ones. Make sure you have a kind of a secure base. But there's also an aversion to risk as we start to get older and more established in our careers, right? You find yourself pretty comfortable with some pretty golden handcuffs at a certain organization, and then it makes it harder to leave to the next organization. And then you get more equity or some sort of golden handcuffs to the next place, and it makes it harder to leave the next place. When I went through your career journey, you went through multiple phases at multiple organizations where you had to make a courageous decision to leave an organization. Can you walk us through the courage that it takes to actually take the risk, where that invariably will push you, and how you felt in those transitions?
Yeah, certainly. And you're absolutely right. Right. Each of those steps that you take involve a little bit of puckering. When it comes to you think about what could go wrong.
Yeah. Oh no, I got to start again.
One of the things that I think you learn is, and I'm going to expand it because it is about personal risk taking as well. But risk taking gets a whole lot easier when you don't feel like you're putting others at risk. And so going back to that communication with your family or with your loved ones and making sure that they're on board with whatever step it is that you're going to take. And then the second piece I think that's really important, that I've done this in every single move that I've made, is I've laid out what are the things that I'm looking for in my next role. And think of any parameter that you can think of: geography, compensation, scope, scale, the job that you're going to be doing, the person you're going to be working for, and lay out which of those components is a must-have, which is a nice-to-have, and which is an I don't care. And then share that with your loved ones. And so you really know what it is that you're looking for and what you're willing to take risks for, because a lot of times the things that we're sitting on, it has more to do with complacency, and it has more to do with crossing our fingers and hoping that we're going to get where we want to go in our career. And the hard truth of it is nobody at a company cares more about your career than you do. And so there's no secret person out there that is pulling the strings for you, either on the good side or the bad side. And companies will reward you if your interests are aligned with theirs and if you're doing good work. And this concept of loyalty, I'm loyal to a company should be loyal to me, throw it out the window. You are loyal to people. People are loyal to you.
It reminds me, of course, loyalty is one of our, military principles. But when you think about my favorite General Patton quote was, oftentimes people talk about loyalty, from the bottom up. More rare is the loyalty from the top down. And I think it's incumbent on all of us really to be able to manage up, across, and down, and let people know what you're doing, the assets, the skill sets, the KPIs, the key performance indicators, the things that you're hitting. And that's why I think it's fascinating, with your career, LT, and what you have done and what you continue to do. What piece, like strategic, tactical piece, though, would you give to folks to take those risks? The great Latin saying, the fortune favors the brave. right, and favors the bold. What type of risk, especially if it's not going to affect their family, should they be taking maybe on, such as going back to school and not making money for 2 years in an MBA program, or hey, go into this program or this certification program? What have you seen, and what would you advise?
Well, I mean, I think first is really defining clearly what the baseline set of things are that you're not willing to risk. What is a level of compensation, or what is a geography, or what is a situation for your family, or an amount of travel, or whatever it is, that you're not willing to take that risk. Once you have that established, and it's a pretty simple, risk reward structure. And by the way, once you do that, all of a sudden taking risks feels a little less scary. I grew up kind of solid middle class family. By the time I was a director at AT&T, I was already making more money than I ever thought I'd make in college. And so if you can bring yourself back to that time and say, what is the baseline set of things that I need to have to provide for my family, to feel like I'm a good contributor to society, to not wake up in the middle of the night staring at the ceiling, wondering how I'm going to pay a bill or whatever it is. Don't risk that. And that's not worth the stress. But what I think you find when you define that is that baseline's actually pretty low, and that the space in which you can take risks is greater than you think. And that hanging on to what you have, again, over and above that baseline set of what's needed for stability, hanging on to what you have just isn't that rewarding. And so whether it's rewarding financially, which I actually think is the least meaningful thing when it comes to risk taking, it has more to do, am I doing something that's meaningful? Am I contributing? Am I part of a team that brings me energy and brings me joy? Those things are usually worth the risk to take.
Well, let's before we wrap up, let's talk about what you've been through and what you experienced the last 12 to 18 months at US Cellular, and kind of where you were a month ago versus where we are generally. Like that's a pretty good conclusion to a pretty still going career, but a pretty good conclusion for the phase of career that you're going through. So we'd love to hear a little bit more about that if you don't mind.
Yeah, certainly. Dan, you introduced me as the former president and CEO of US Cellular, so I'm currently unemployed. So let's back out why that would be the case. We just sold US Cellular's wireless business to T-Mobile, and a big chunk of the spectrum that we own to both T-Mobile and AT&T and Verizon. That was it was a large deal, $4.4 billion. It was a deal that was a long time in the making. I think the interesting learning is the importance of mission and the importance of purpose through that process. We announced that we were going to be engaging on a strategic process. We had to announce it considerably before we announced the deal. And so our employees knew we were likely going to be selling the business. Then in November of 2024, November of 2023, we announced that we were going to be selling to T-Mobile, and we've gone through a 15-month process to get to where we are in August of 25. I'm so sorry, May of 24 to August of 25. I'm losing track of my dates. And so it was 15 months of regulatory approvals that we had to go through. And the fascinating thing is we actually had less people leave the business in the back half of that process after we made the announcement that we were going to sell than had left the previous year. And why is that? Well, I think the main reason is because people believed in what they were doing. They believed in the mission of the business. They were passionate about what they did. And a word we used a lot was run through the base. All right, we're going to run through the base, and we're going to run this company, and we're going to serve our customers, and we're going to serve each other until the day that we don't anymore. And that mission, and the importance of that mission, of what the company did, we mostly served rural areas, the importance of serving rural America with excellence. People believed in it, and they believed in it because we were hammering home the importance of that mission and that purpose long before we were announcing a deal. And so continuing to emphasize that people felt as if what they did was important. They did run through the base. We did get that deal closed August 1st. I am now happily unemployed. So waiting to see kind of what the next chapter will lead to. But certainly whatever that chapter will be, it will involve mission, it will involve purpose, and it will involve the lessons I learned in the military.
That's great.
Well, LT, that's been your
great.
life. That is your life's testament. I mean, remarkable from the Marine Corps to the corporate board corner office. So, LT, thanks for joining us for Word Money. We appreciate you. We appreciate your continued service to this nation, and we look forward to hearing excitingly what might happen next in your life. So, thanks for joining us.
It was a pleasure. Thank you both for the time, and thank you to your listeners for both your time and your service. Take care, everyone.
Thanks, LT. All right, everybody. So that's our show. So listen, subscribe, and review Word Money wherever you get your podcast, and find us at Yahoo Finance. I'm Patrick Murphy.
And I'm Dan Kunze. We'll see you again next week.
This content was not intended to be financial advice and should not be used as a substitute for professional financial services.